My name is Antonia Calvo, for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, and I am here today with Alistair Johnston, is our research director. We're really excited to share some insights and strategies with you today that will help you leverage customer experience feedback programs as a tool to really drive business impact within your organization. I know we are talking mainly about CX today, but as an organization, ActXM, we truly understand the unique challenge of B2B companies have around customer, but also employee brand and digital experience. And we typically find that clients that we work with, they will start with the customer experience, but they also over time tend to evolve to create a more holistic listening program and strategy that really includes employee brands and components of digital experience. So our approach and what we do at ActXM very quickly is really to help organizations with a combination of strategic program design tools and leveraging advanced technologies to set them up for success in terms of listening, understanding and acting on experience management data. So I have a packed agenda. I think it should probably take us around 45 minutes, and we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. So bear with us. We'll make the space to for you to ask any questions and address those questions at the end of the session today. Hopefully, we'll make it interactive as well. We want to share with you some examples. We have tools, but we also want to share with you some examples of how we are applying these tools and our customers applying these tools on their experience management programs. It's really great to see so many of you join the webinar, and we have a really good mix of existing ActXM customers that we know are well advanced in their CX measurement program, but we also have some kind of new faces, potentially companies who are just starting their CX feedback program. So what we have designed and the way we structure this webinar is to hopefully give you ideas that apply to everyone, independently of where you are on your listening strategy. So really want to cover four main things. The first one being a very basic understanding, and basic is not necessarily a bad thing, but at least we want to share with you what are the core things that you should be doing depending on where you are in your CX roadmap. So we will provide you some guidelines if you are just starting on baseline, what we consider really important, as you then move on to getting more of a CX transformation program in your organization, what activities and strategies do you need to put in place. We also want to share with you a couple of tools and ideas on how you can realize value from your CX program. And what I mean here is really how can you start measuring ROI? Is often the typical question we are asked, and it doesn't need to be complicated. It's not about setting up a full ROI program. Often it's looking at specific projects that you're working on, or CX is enabling the organization, and how you can put a dollar value against that, against those initiatives. And then I'll pass on to Alistair, who's going to take us through the B2B CX Program Challenge, and that includes response rates, the different nuances of looking at B2B contacts, and from influencers to decision makers. This is definitely very specific to the way you need to approach your clients for feedback. And we'll close off with a 3-tier closed loop feedback program. So 3 ways of acting on feedback within your organization. So that's what we'll do today. I'll start with just saying, as consultants, we really like consultants and researchers by trade. We really like some good statistics, and there's a lot of information out there. If you do some search, and some Qualtrics, actually, our key partner, has a lot of research that explains and puts some metrics and value to where the B2B customer experience is currently and how organizations can realize value from this type of programs. So we chose three I guess, key trends that can help demonstrate where things are. First place is we have 65, there's research that says 65% of customers find their B2B experience less seamless than consumer interactions. So this is a massive opportunity for B2B organizations, the realization that your customers in general, obviously, they potentially are less satisfied with the B2B experience than they are with the consumer interactions that they're having on their day-to-day lives. So this gap is a really big opportunity because we also know that when organizations are delivering a good customer experience, satisfied customers are much more likely to spend more within those organizations. And they're also more likely to be willing to be referral for business or even refer actually the business to business and colleagues. What is also interesting is there is a gap in the experience. We know when the experience is delivered well, companies, customers spend more, but we also know that most of the B2B companies, and that 70% are in the very early stages of XM maturity. So imagine this, that you have 7 out of 10 B2B companies who are just doing the basics of customer experience. Most likely they're doing an annual survey and probably not taking any actions from it. So there is an opportunity here, I guess, to differentiate your organization from your competitors. All right, so in terms of CX program roadmap, look, I could spend days talking and helping you set up a CX program roadmap for your organization. So this is what we're doing here. What we really want to share with you is give you some tips and then some ideas on how, independently of where you are, what are the key elements that you should be considering. And we break this roadmap into 3 areas: foundational baseline, value-based expansion, and customer-centric approach. If we look at the foundational baseline, assuming you either starting or considering starting, the 4 things that we will ask or recommend our customers to really think about and consider is, in the first place, start potentially with measuring that customer relationship. We call it relationship survey. It's a really good way of starting measuring the experience and understanding your customer satisfaction with your service, with your products, their perceptions of you and your business as a brand. So it gives us a really good baseline to understand what you're doing well and potentially what are the areas of and opportunity areas for improvement. The second element of this foundational baseline, it's really important to follow up with clients. If you're asking your customers to spend 10-15 minutes to complete a questionnaire, make sure that you engage with them post sharing that feedback, to thank them for the feedback, or following up with customers that potentially are detractors or not necessarily satisfied. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the closed loop session. It can also be, depending on your organization, if you have 200 customers or have thousands of customers, obviously the follow-up needs to be adjusted to the numbers, but it could be even a simple email from your CEO to clients just to inform them that you have listened to them and you are taking actions. The third element is, obviously, you completed the survey, you have some feedback, you have insights. Identify 1-2 areas for improvements. You won't most likely be able to do everything in one go, but it's really important to pick up, couple of projects that you're really going to assist and drive action for improvement. Now, this is important for many different reasons, but I guess the main one comes back to the value of the CX program. Unless you do something with the feedback that you are receiving, you'll never really realize value from the CX program. And I'll pick up a little bit more on this when it comes to value planning and value realization. So you've got your foundations set up, relationship survey, some form of feedback with your customers, following up with your customers, identify opportunities for improvement, and then take action, or help the organization drive action. When you move to the value-based expansion, at this stage, you probably have been running your relationship survey for a year. You have, again, taken some actions on key areas of the customer experience, and you're now potentially ready to start drafting a CX program strategy and roadmap. And I say drafting because a CX program roadmap is never static. It always needs to evolve. But the program strategy and roadmap will really give you a guideline on what are the key elements that you need to drive and the actions that you need to promote within your organization to get value of CX. At this stage, you also start potentially looking at expanding the listening post. So the relationship survey is actually a really good way to inform what these listening, more real-time transactional surveys might look like. Do you need to prioritize onboarding survey, post-delivery, post-product delivery, or potentially look at the customer journey from the renewal point of view, or post-service interaction, digital, there's a lot of many different options, and this listening post and what you're going to prioritize in terms of real-time data collection will really depend based on your business. We also typically find in this phase that you start managing a portfolio of CX improvement projects. So think again, baseline, you have 1 or 2 projects, you really focus on driving action. As you move on towards a larger scale type of project, you will want to manage and have different projects that CX is assisting in driving and improving. And we also find at this stage that it's important to dive deeper into customer segments and groups. And what I mean by this, it can mean a lot of different things. Qualitative research is typically something that we see customers diving into this area. It might be, for example, that you want to do some qualitative interviews with key decision makers, or you need to develop a new product, or you need to build a website portal, and you want to collect more qualitative or in-depth feedback on a particular area or project that you're working on. So it's the time to dive much deeper into this area.
I think it's important to say at this time that no single source of information exists in a silo, and the best decisions are made by organizations that are embracing a number of different data sources. And although a CX program is a fantastic tool to have to help you drive customer experience, other information sources that you have within the business, be it internal groups, internal teams, other types of research, or even market data or press coverage, all contribute invaluably to help you provide better services and operate better as an organization as a whole.
Yeah. So with this, we collect feedback, we share feedback, we act on feedback, and really important to dive into specific areas and then have a list of projects that you're working on. This will then set you into the next stage of the customer experience program, what we call customer-centric, building a customer-centric culture. And at this stage, we see organizations really putting together cohesive CX communication programs. And this communication is back to the business, to the employees, to the different stakeholders, but also back to clients. It's also this stage, by this time, and we're talking really, if you do this, it's a 24-month plan, really. But by the time you get to the customer-centric culture phase you have probably already implemented, taken action on a few areas, and is also the time that you can start measuring the ROI of CX, because you have data, you have metrics that can prove the evolution of the customer experience based on the feedback and the actions that you have taken. It's also important at this stage to get more specific around program governance, so really identifying within your organization who is responsible for what roles do you need to have. This is ideally you start getting champions involved in the customer experience program early on, and as early as the foundational stage. But during the program governance, like full program governance, really gets into the roles and responsibilities at executive level, manager, director level, and then the frontline staff. I wouldn't necessarily really start looking at setting organization-wide targets for CX metrics until you have at least a good communication plan in place, you have proved the value, you have a program governance, and to get that buy-in from the organization, you need to do a lot of that legwork before you set up CX metrics.
I also think it's worth saying that it can seem quite daunting if you look at the process from the foundation all the way through to building a customer-centric culture. It is important to remember that it is an iterative process. Everyone has to start somewhere. It is an industry where there is jargon, there is best practice. Invariably, what you start with may look very different to what you end up with, but that's the journey and that's the learning that you actually have. And I think the other thing that's a really important consideration for me is about identifying those targets and setting those initial objectives. They don't have to be too fancy or too grand, but what they do is they give you a great opportunity to demonstrate success in the program, to encourage support and investment from the organization going forward. It's also, as I'll talk a little bit about more, it's also a great way to actually market the success of your program to your actual customers themselves, to encourage their buy-in and participation. If you can show those quick wins at an early day, whether it's internally or externally, you go a long way to supporting the program and helping build our strong foundations moving forward.
Yeah. I always like to share an example of one client that we work with, the large utility customer in the B2B space. And they have been, I'll probably say they are on the customer-centric culture stage of their program. And they have CX metrics at the executive level. But in terms of the frontline staff and the account managers, the metric that they set is a response rate metric, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. It's often we get to focus on the metric going up, going down, how improving. Sure, it's really important, but more important is that you get the feedback and you act on it. So you can be creative, I guess, with some of these things, and really find what works for your organization as well. All right, so next is I would like to talk to you around realizing CX program value. So you have set up your foundations, and it's really important to think about how to measure and realize value from CX. Obviously, every business is different. I want to share with you some examples, but just use it as, I guess, a guideline in terms of how you can use these two tools to come up with projects and their ROI model for your organization. I think more than, saying that CSAT has improved by 10%, which is important and usually means that your CSAT, your NPS is improving over time. It does mean that you are adding value to the business, but sometimes you need to go a little bit more specific and be able to translate how a CX program can actually add to the bottom line in terms of dollars amount. So the way to do this is they kind of work together, but before you do the value delivery, you need to do value planning. So value planning really involves about identifying areas, projects where CX improvements will have the biggest impact. So this can be insights that you have found or priorities, company priorities and initiatives, and how can CX support those initiatives and priorities. And then the second stage is around the value delivery. So how do you measure the value delivered by these initiatives, and effectively then start creating an ROI model that can help you justify to your executives, your board members, investment the investment needs in CX is worthwhile. Underneath both value planning and value delivery, there are metrics, and you need metrics that help you measure the experience, customer satisfaction, NPS, customer efforts. We won't go through metrics today. It's again another webinar. But you do need metrics. And I also want to call out, it's not just about your CSAT metrics. For the different projects, initiatives you're working on, there will be operational and financial metrics and data that is worthwhile identifying and tidying up with those projects. So how do you go around this? So in terms of value planning, make sure that your CX program has a list of business initiatives that the CX function can support. So think about what are the company goals, what are the core initiatives running in the business where CX can support, or customer feedback can provide insights to those initiatives. It might also be initiatives that are become initiatives because you have identified those as part of the CX, the customer feedback program. So identify initiatives, again, might be goals or projects or findings that you have from your data. Really think about how CX can support those goals, and then how would you measure success by achieving these specific goals and the initiatives. I want to share with you a couple of examples. Typical B2B, increased retention rates, renewal, especially on the professional service, is a really important company goal, and has a very clear direct line to the bottom line. So that might be a goal for the company. How can CX support? Well, think about setting up a system where you have real-time alerts based on customer feedback, for example. Or if you have that help you identify at-risk clients, or it could be, especially if you are on B2B and you have thousands of customers, you create a metric system and alert system that potentially notifies your account managers, your renewal teams, potentially customers that may be at risk. How would you measure success in this case? Well, NPS, CSAT, usually good ways from a CX point of view, CX metrics, but you also want to start looking at customer lifetime value. Has it increased? Renewal rates, retention rates are also important metrics to take in consideration. Another kind of more practical example, let's imagine, for example, your organization may be going through the process of digitalizing the service, setting up a new website, coming up with a customer app or a portal, anything related to this area, like the CX, the support CX can give to accomplish these goals might be, for example, helping define the challenge, the pain points, doing research that can inform the feature prioritization, running user testing, right? But if you do that right, like you building a product, a digital solution that meets the customer needs, obviously the effects in terms of metrics is you're going to have a higher satisfaction rate or a higher customer effort score because the features have been built with that feedback in mind. And from an operational point of view, it might be adoption rate has increased, or you have first-time users success rate has increased, or the number of the time and effort put on a task. So again, every business is different. What's important at this stage is identify some projects, really define how you can support those projects, and start having an understanding of what metrics are we going to use to measure the success implementation of these projects.
It's also worth saying collaboration, and this is absolutely key, that, again, you don't have to be in a silo, again, to use that word. You can, embracing the right people in the right team and the digital side of things, embracing the digital team, the website design team, whatever it might be, speaking to the wider people within the wider organization about the importance of retention rates and renewals, the processes involved in the organization. It's all a vital part of driving the sort of the program itself and making sure you give yourself the best chance of success.
Yeah. For sure, and if we do this part right, actually, then the value delivery, it's a lot easier because you have already identified the projects, potentially assisting with the taking action, and you have some metrics in place. So for value delivery or ROI, we like to use the value chain framework, and it really is 4 different components that you can adjust this framework to really help you identify identify gaps in the way you manage your program and help identify and create value for your organization. So we like to think of insight. So you have an insight that you brought into your organization. You have your customer feedback survey tells you that specific parts of the customer service is not working, or the customer group is more dissatisfied. We'll go through some examples in a moment, but you have identified the insights. You then take action. So you put actions based on the insights that you have uncovered. You need to have KPIs to measure the impact of the action. So come back again to the metrics. And then with KPIs and taking action, you should then be able to start measuring the business impact. So what is the monetary equivalent of these KPIs improvement in terms of cost savings or new revenue generated? So let me share a couple of examples. So it might be, for example, in terms of insights that, look at customer feedback and also logistic data. 35% of the order processing support tickets have issues, have errors in the specifications. The action might be that you implement an order verification system. So I know, not a designer here in terms of order systems, but just again, it's to showcase a little bit of how these framework can work. And then you start moving into KPI improvements. So you have implemented this order verification system. Over time, you identify that 40%, there's a 40% decrease in order-related support tickets and a 10% increase in satisfaction with order accuracy, for example. Once you have this, you should be able to measure the business impacts. Say, for example, by reducing the volume of support tickets, you save X amount in staff costs because you need to spend less time addressing these tickets. Or, decreasing incorrect orders generated a further 1.5 million in savings. Yes, hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea of how you can apply this value chain framework to come up with the value delivery model. Another example, around the same lines, could be professional service organization. You find, for example, that's the survey data reveal 40% of your corporate clients felt the communication about case progress is not enough. And actually find this is communication around case progress is one of the pain areas that we identify with our professional service customers. An action, it might be that you introduce a monthly progress report that is emailed to your customers summarizing the case developments. So as a result of that, you will hope like in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, you start seeing a reduction in client inquiries related to case status. And as a result, you also see a satisfaction in the scores in terms of communication and responsiveness. So the business impact is then potentially saving money by reducing the volume of inquiries in terms of the administrative type. So anyway, we just wanted to share with you, like ROI is a really important part of proving the value of CX. And we find that these couple of tools looking at planning the value, really think about the projects that you can add value to, and then measuring that value delivery through ROI model can take you a long way in terms of proving CX value. I pass on now to Alistair.
Thank you. There's nothing like giving the challenges to the grumpy old guy with a Scottish accent. I can hopefully frame these problems so much better in live. Thanks, Antonia. Look, there are challenges in setting up B2B programs. We are aware of that. We can find the business our businesses are different to consumers for sure, and that can manifest itself in the programs. The good news is, although we can talk about problems and identify problems, both in terms of what businesses are and also the process, the actual CX process itself, there are also solutions, and none of these problems we necessarily view as insurmountable, but it does go back to what I said earlier about the need to collaborate internally and plan carefully is a vital part of the process. So we've sort of split the challenges into two broad areas. You've got businesses themselves and then the actual process. So let's talk a bit about the businesses. And I think it's obviously not rocket science, but when it comes to developing a customer experience program for businesses, we must acknowledge that businesses themselves are different to consumers in a number of ways, which do impact in the process. The first thing we're saying that there are just more moving parts within an individual business. I'm sure if you think quietly about your own organization, you might see conflicting goals, conflicting needs within the organization. How often might you hear the conversation that your product development team are at loggerheads with the customer support team? Finance and marketing might be sort of arguing with each other or debating what's the best way to go about things. Seems to me that sales can often be arguing with everything that moves in the organization. It does exist. People build empires, people have their own objectives, and that can impact on how we do things. Thinking about businesses as a whole as well, they tend to typically have longer sales cycles. You know, an individual consumer might be making decisions on a weekly or on a monthly basis when the paycheck comes in. Organizations are working to budgets, monthly, quarterly, more likely sort of 6 monthly or annually. Decisions and events have to be built around these processes, and that clearly influences the views they provide in building programs as a whole. We'll also see as well that, you know, I'm really fascinated by the fact that businesses see themselves getting less seamless experiences, but there is a tendency within business as well to be a bit more dollar driven. I think it feels like the accountants are driving the entire world, and clearly businesses must generate revenues and profits, and that can impact on how they do things too. So it is always worth thinking about that these dynamics are going on. They are a bit more rational and can be a bit more sort of dollar focused. And I think the other big sort of thing to think about in the B2B CX experience is just think a little bit about a company that might have 100 million of sales. Now, sort of 1 million of these customers might give you $100 each, or 100 of these customers might give you $1 million each. That's a very different dynamic, thinking of those two sensitivities and those two moving parts. So it's well worth thinking about who is it we're actually speaking to and how do we sort of move forward successfully with programs. But I hasten to add, we know businesses are different. We accept businesses are different. It makes absolute sense that businesses are different. With the right thinking, the right planning, you can certainly overcome these challenges. And it certainly shouldn't be seen as a barrier to action, because we do know as a tool to differentiate yourself, as a way of building loyalty, successful B2B sort of CX programs for B2B audiences can certainly deliver great outcomes for businesses. There are also some sort of core process challenges which exist for CX programs too, which as a researcher aren't necessarily new conversations for me. It feels like I've been talking about some of these things for many, many years. Identifying and engaging the right audience is a critical part of the process, and I'll share some ideas about how you think you can tackle this. Smaller sample sizes is something that I know is dear to quite a few people in this webinar, and again, I'm happy to share some thoughts about how we might be able to impact this area. And finally, just the overall sort of area of response rates for B2B surveys. I think there are a lot of opportunities to position surveys and CX programs properly to your end customers, which can help circumvent some of the challenges we might face.
All right,
okay.
Next.
So let's go, first of all, let's look at these three big process challenges first and foremost. And the first one is just that challenge of reaching the relevant decision makers. Now, anyone who's worked with me for any period of time knows that I'm a bit of a stickler. The key thing about any research program is actually finding the right people to take part in the research. The example I always quote, and forgive me if I'm sort of parroting to some of you, but it's the example. I used to do a lot of work with startups in a previous role. And when they found out I was a research guy, they would often come up to me and proudly say, "Oh, I love market research. I've spoken to thousands of people about my products." And you think that's fantastic. I'm pleased about that you're using research. I then talk to them about the product and find it's some impossibly complicated, high-end, nuclear scientist sort of tool or product that only about 10 people in the world could probably understand. Yet they've spoken to 1,000 people about it, and it's all uniformly wonderful. They're speaking to great Auntie Ethel at Christmas lunch, finding out what she thinks. Now, great Auntie Ethel loves the person, wants to give them good advice, but frankly, her advice can only be dangerous at best. You know, it's really essential that we do find out who these key people are to us and make sure we weight their reviews accordingly. We've got to identify who these really important people are for the organization. How are they interacting with us, and make sure that they become well represented in our program. There are tools to help us do this. We can do customer journey mapping. We can make sure that we dig into different decision-making roles and influencers and who our actual customers are. Also, a very useful tool is looking at financial value. If we can map the actual relative worth of individual people and what their contribution to our program is, then you're clearly going to make a more positive step forward in building the right program. Another area we talk about a lot are internal data sets. I have to say, across our clients, we can see some very variable results in terms of the data sets they have to work with. Some are impressively impressive, others are frankly downright horrendous, and it's a massive challenge. Another thing worth bearing in mind is within organizations, I've already mentioned how there are competing sort of areas and how some divisions are competing against each other. It's not unusual to find often sales are the ones that have a great database or the most current up-to-date database, but there's a lot of reticence to share across divisions. And I think anything we can do to approach that and sort of try and circumvent that as an issue is a really powerful thing to do. There is a reality that building a sort of really good data set is hard work. It costs time, it costs money. There's that old adage that once you actually complete a data set or complete a sort of database, it's 10 to 20% out of date already. So, it does take time, it does take effort. It does involve, looking at ways you can collaborate with others to make sure that you get the right response. And really that encouraging collaboration is a really powerful way to go about it. The other way around this, of course, would be investing in a sort of really decent CRM system, but I sense that might be a different webinar that we might get to in the future. The final thing that's worth thinking about in terms of getting the right audience is really thinking about how they interact with you and sort of categorizing the contacts, who they are, how they're impacting on in your organization as a whole. I also think it's really important that there is a tendency, and it's quite understandable to say that really the views of those influencers and decision makers might be more important than the end users. And whilst I'd accept in some probably 9 out of 10 cases that is true, there are always exceptions. And I think it's a dangerous assumption to make without doing due diligence in that area. And the two examples I have in mind that I always think of is that when I sort of in the early days of insurance platforms being built for insurance brokers, these are platforms that aggregated different types of insurance policies. The strategic guys really were non-committal about them in terms of what value they actually brought to the business. It was actually only when the users were sort of spoken to and sort of talked about it, you actually saw the end benefit, which then transmitted up the organization. Similarly, when the energy market deregulated, there were dollar savings being flashed around that you could buy energy from companies based in different states, different areas, whatever the case might be. But it was usually the guys on the ground who would be more practical, thinking about the service, thinking about the time and waiting periods there might be between service delivery, which again made people think about what it is they're actually getting. So the lesson is you're all different. You'll all have your own customer bases. You'll have your own sort of audiences that you need to engage to. Spending the time and effort to really dig in, understand what people are and what they mean to your organization is a really powerful and important part of building your program.
Can I just add, I think more practical terms here, we do see a lot of our customers struggling with getting a good database of people that they can go back to and seek feedback, but also more important, as you're pointing out, be able to identify who are the different roles, the different user types. Although we want a database as clean as possible, throughout the survey process is also possible to ask the right questions to identify those people. So don't get to hang up that, spend months and weeks trying to clean up the database and not take action because of that, because there are ways to support you through identifying those people. You want it comprehensive, right? Read the emails and get your account managers to help you collect those contacts and really get everyone involved. We were discussing early on, actually, potentially looking at different databases within your organization. It's not just the CRM, right? So you could have users or customer contacts that are not sitting in your standard CRM. It could be, they come through the contact center, for example, and you have emails for those people. So that's a good source of getting contacts. And then through a well-designed survey, we'll also be able to identify some key information about who they are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, look, the next thing worth thinking about is just addressing smaller sample sizes, which again I know is a common issue and one that us researchers can talk about. The reality is that there are less businesses out there than consumers, and the actual volume of most organizations have of business customers will be smaller. And I think we need to be kind of pragmatic about that. That is the case. I guess my advice and my feelings on something like this is it's important to kind of work out really what is an acceptable number for you. I mean, what is in your comfort zone and is a tolerable number of responses for you to get in any particular areas. Statistically, there are people out there who will tell you that 30 people represents a sort of satisfactory or sort of minimum satisfactory base for analysis. My gut feeling is I tend to go a little bit higher than that. I tend to think 50 is probably an appropriate number. But at the other end of the spectrum, anything more than sort of science will tell you that any more than about 250 responses, it really, the statistical variance of numbers bigger than that tends to really plateau. So you're probably talking about 50 to 250 is a satisfactory base for really getting responses on specific issues over time. Now, this can be complicated should you sort of have, you know, very complex business with lots of individual units or subsets to think about, and that should certainly be factored into your thinking. But pragmatism is a kind of watchword, and it's important to try and set those objectives and be sort of clear in what you kind of think in this particular area. If you are having trouble and if there are sort of challenges out there, there are other ways of trying to circumvent this problem. One thing would be looking at sort of combining quantitative data sources. There may well be that you have got different data sets that are gathered across different regions or across different business units. You can make an assessment is, can you aggregate those findings together to give yourself a more robust view of things? Something else researchers will typically consider doing is adjusting or weighting for sort of individual variances or differences in your customer base. You can make one response count for 10 responses if need be, depending on the sort of how they fit into your overall customer base. A final area, which I must say I'm still a little bit suspicious of, but there is certainly an area that's been increasingly talked about, is the emergence of synthetic data. There are people out there sitting in labs who are now creating data sets which mimic real data sets. This is especially prevalent in business-to-business audiences, because I think that's the area where there is the most pronounced need for boosted sample numbers. I dare say it's like all these things, it does feel a bit embryonic, and I'm a bit suspicious of it just now, but that's more a lack of knowledge and sort of tangible examples. But there's no reasons to believe that synthetic data might become much more powerful in the future as we move forward. Other things that are worth considering as an organization, you may not have the raw numbers taking part in your quantitative CX program, so is there an opportunity to leverage qualitative insights? Now, by qualitative insights, I don't mean the qualitative insights, which are open-ended responses to surveys necessarily. I mean actual physical in-depth interviews or focus groups with your customers themselves, sitting down in a room with them or on a computer screen as it happens these days and spending 30, 40, 50 minutes, even an hour with them, talking about their experiences, talking about their views and things.
Yeah. Sorry, just to add on this, I find it really interesting that you'll find key decision makers probably more willing to sit down and do a proper interview about the issues that they have and how your organization can help resolve those issues than completing a 15-minute survey.
For sure.
With the right recruitment approach.
Look, it allows them, I think, to frame conversations in their own way, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I think that is a really sort of powerful thing. The challenge of qualitative insights is often that the numbers you conduct are relatively low. Obviously, it's more expensive to conduct a qualitative interview, but it's important to say that even sort of 10 qualitative interviews, you know, as a researcher, I've made some pretty big decisions in terms of introducing products or killing products, developing ad campaigns, helping sort of build employee reward programs based on literally 10 interviews. You get more data, it's a different type of data. It can often be scalable and usable in a sort of wider context. I mean, what one business decision maker said is often deeply relevant to what another 10 business decision makers say. With the right experience and the right survey design, you can really help fill the gaps. And again, it's worth making the point that I made earlier, that the best decisions are taken when you have multiple information sources available. So you're leveraging quantitative research with qualitative research to kind of build the right sort of programs. And finally, it is worth just thinking about those key accounts. Whilst we're all trained to tell everyone how important our customers are, the reality is some customers are far more important than others. They give us more dollars, they have more impact on our business. And it's important that we acknowledge that and understand who these people are. Also, in a B2B context, if you've got 3 or 4 key customers, I'd be pretty surprised if your CX quantitative program is really your sole source of feedback on them. You should be making sure that you know them. Your sales team, your relationship managers, I dare say your executive team will be in regular contact or should be in regular contact with these people, having the constant ongoing information with them to make sure that you really stay across your key accounts and get the best insights you can from them for the safety of your business moving forward.
I think just a quick note before we move on to response rates and associating key accounts with smaller sample sizes. Sometimes we see customers saying, oh, well, I have only X number of customers. But if you really look at who are those customers, do they represent 60, 70, 80% of your business? There's still feedback worthwhile looking, sure. Right? All right, response rates.
Response rates are final. Another thing that researchers, listen, I'm an element here, I'm getting to talk about researchy things. Look, research things, we can talk about it for a lot of time. It's really not a perfect science. You know, there are some best practice things that you can certainly do to really make sure you get the best sort of response. The first thing is kind of leveraging your teams and making sure that you get them across the process and making sure that you approach your individual sort of clients in the right sort of way. It's very important to make the point that obtaining feedback for a CX program, we are relying on goodwill, just as you are in broader market research. You know, there is no obligation for our customers to necessarily help us. We should be acknowledging how important they are to us. We should be acknowledging the role that their feedback plays. Ideally, we should be explaining clearly what the process is, what we've done. And this is back to a point I made earlier. We should be using the examples of what we're doing differently or winning or changing to make sure that we actually can demonstrate to clients, these are the outcomes of the processes. This is why we should be doing it. And this is why this research process is a very good thing for you. So be clear, be tangible, and really try and position the research in the best possible way.
I think so a good way to also look at this is thinking that the survey is actually part of the experience your customers are having with your organization.
Sure.
So being able to, as you mentioned, having those communicating back and having the surveys, making sure they are well designed, it is element of the customer experience.
Absolutely right. And I mean, there's an old adage that, you know, people don't like doing surveys, and the optimistic researcher in me is kind of more about, it's not people don't like doing surveys, people don't like doing badly designed surveys. If we have good principles in our surveys, they're short, they're well designed, they generate good sort of quality information. They are an extension of our brand, an extension of our program, as Antonia said, and they represent us in the way that they're designed. So taking the time and effort to do it well is certainly a positive tool for us. Also, simple things, which again, in the Qualtrics environment, we're very lucky to be able to do. Presenting research surveys in a way that suits the individual, whether it's email, whether it's on-site, SMS, mobile friendly, whatever it might be. Making sure that the survey is done on the individual's terms as best we can in terms of encouraging them to complete is a vital part of the process. Something else worth thinking about, especially if you're struggling with response rates, is thinking about incentives. And there actually are a bunch of incentives. I think the initial thought of most people would have in incentives is giving something to the person taking part. But really, why should that be? If we think that it can be hard identifying appropriate lists of clients, and we can see this in employee programs, that, you know, why not have internal incentives, other ways of encouraging teams, divisions, products, whatever it might be, to actually put more of their customers forward to take part in programs. You know, we can always turn it into sort of healthy competition. When it comes to rewarding or incentivizing external participants, well, there's a bunch of things we can do, financial and non-financial. Some people suggest cash, other people feel more comfortable with charitable donations. Something that I think is often overlooked in a business world that really shouldn't be is it's well worth thinking about sharing non-confidential information. Businesses, as a rule, are always kind of curious on what other businesses are doing. If we can sort of glean some good information or even put in some value add sections, views in big industry issues, whatever it might be, that itself might be a way of just encouraging more and more businesses to take part in our programs. So again, keep an open mind and think about what we can do to encourage participation. And finally, this kind of is the whole essence of CX, and both Antonia and I have already alluded to this, that another really powerful way of encouraging responses in our surveys is closing that feedback loop. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes' time, but really it's this explaining what the feedback is, following up with customers and how their feedback is being used, and really reinforcing the value of the program and reinforcing the value of their contribution to a program, to encourage that these surveys will remain sort of visible in their inbox and make sure they contribute in the best possible way.
We'll get on to action-driven.
Action-driven programs. Yeah. So again, really can't overestimate just how important this is. This is the whole essence. I mean, what's the point of gathering information if you don't do anything about it? It's a classic research situation. I've sat with clients being briefed about survey design and they say, we want to know this, we want to do this. And it's, well, sorry, but what are you actually going to do with it? I mean, how can you possibly do anything with the information you're gathering? So why ask the question? When it comes to closed loop, it's a massive part of what we do. And there's kind of three moving parts in the closed loop process. It's inner loop, team huddles, and outer loop. And I hasten to add, I have named none of them. Are pretty odd names, especially the team huddles. But maybe everyone needs a hug, I don't know. Explaining those individual parts in detail, the inner loop is a vital part of the process, and probably the part that most of us think about when we talk about the closed loop process. It's about taking the comments that are mentioned in surveys and reacting to them quickly and decisively to fix them, to fix those individual challenges. Typically, these issues are raised either by, it can be sort of approaching people who might give low satisfaction scores, an NPS or CSAT, whatever it might be, or if we've been really clever, we can actually pin sort of warning triggers into open-ended text responses. The benefit of the latter is that clearly, if you're sort of approaching and closing the loop with people in terms of who are dissatisfied, that's obviously a powerful way of doing it, but you can have problems and also be satisfied. So if you pin responses to open-ended comments that are said, you can actually make happy clients happier, which should never be kind of overlooked. The process for this is really making sure that you identify the problem quickly and make sure that you have the capabilities and the resource internally to solve the problem. One of the big challenges you might face with the inner loop program would be sort of making sure that you have the resource available. And certainly in consumer markets, that is a challenge we see. Clients can be a bit overwhelmed by, they launch a program and before they know it, there might be a couple of thousand emails or triggers, alerts there saying, demanding attention and demanding fixes for the problem. So maybe those small sample sizes in a business context aren't such a bad thing in the short term. But the serious point is, it's absolutely vital to resource the way you deal with these problems and make sure that you get them fixed in the best possible way. In terms of who delivers the solutions, well, look, it's not beyond the realms of reality that, you know, it's senior executives, certainly for those high value clients in a business to business environment. The proactive executives might be on the line saying, I'm dealing with your problem personally, you're very important to us, let's do it. It may be sort of wider customer service teams for sort of smaller down the line. The point being, if you make a promise and if you're kind of talking about doing this, you've got to do it well, you've got to do it accurately, and you can't mismanage expectations or promises.
I'm not sure if I've shared this example already early on, but we do have a customer that when they have multiple surveys running, but their annual relationship survey, they collect around 1,000 interviews from their customers, and they have everyone in the organization doing calls to people who completed the survey. So have around 100 different, from frontline staff to executives following up with customers. They actually have a 20% response rate, which is really high in B2B context. We'll see a lot of customers having much lower response rates. And I reckon, even though I can't prove this, but I think it's a lot of it, and they've been running it for a number of years, is because of this. Because it just gets really that additional touch with the customers. And everyone needs to be in touch with the customers, right?
I think that's the essence of it, the experience management. I am conscious of time, so I will just kind of rattle through. The second two parts of the process are team huddles. Now, the point about team huddles, this is all about taking the insights and solutions that we get from the inner loop process and making sure they're embedded and shared with employees across the organization. Really, the point is that you don't want to lose the solutions that you develop or you identify in the loop, and you want to find a sort of formalized way to let your customer service team and other teams as appropriate share these learnings and start to embed them into training and behaviors moving forward. And then the final build on that would be sort of the outer loop process, which is about building a sort of systemic way of addressing your recurring issues. This typically is about longer term focus rather than a short term fix. It's about taking all the learnings from the inner loop, amalgamating them together and turning them into strategy that will look after the organization in a long term process. I guess in a political analogy, it's a bit like taking those private member bills and turning them into law of the organizations. But making sure that the right people are across this and these sort of processes are set in stone, give your program far more credibility and likely to encourage far more funding in the future. And then finally, just something that we thought we might want to share with you just moving forward is a little bit of conversation about the XM maturity model. Now, we could talk about this a long time, but I just want to drop with you the high level sort of thoughts on this at the moment. That this is a system where we have an opportunity in alignment with the Qualtrics XM maturity program and model. We can actually share a survey across key decision makers in an organization to capture their views on the CX program. Now, this can work for organizations who are really very embryonic in the program, or this can work for organizations who have got a mature program in place. What it does is it really allows you an opportunity to kind of benchmark how your program resonates within your organization. You can look at it internally in terms of how your program might resonate within one department compared to another, or you can even use it or to benchmark your organization against international benchmarks that exist via the organization. The process is just like a CX process. There is a survey, you share it with key stakeholders, you get the responses, you aggregate them up, and then you can make some calls on where your organization is. And hopefully it can give you an established framework to really identify areas of opportunity for your program or areas of high performance to learn from moving forward.
Yep. But if we'll certainly share more, more details with you around the XM maturity model, even it's a good starting point, even if you as CX managers and leaders, just going through the questions and actually getting in what is your perceived maturity level of CX maturity within your organization. All right, so we are going to Q&A. I do have a question here from Ruth, and while we go through Q&A, I may just put these up, and if you want to share your feedback around this webinar, that will be awesome. The question/comment we have here is around response rates. So response rates can often be a controversial topic for people who are not research savvy, and they believe it has to be a large size to take the feedback seriously. And that is true, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be, you don't need large sizes of samples.
It's back to this. If you can't get the numbers, then there must be other information you can probably look on and rely on and use those kind of multiple sources to give you the best outcomes. It is just unfortunately the nature of beast that some areas it's hard to get proper numbers, but then speak to your relationship teams, your sales teams, your internal stakeholders. Go out there, speak to people one-on-one, get their views in depth. You know, a lot of understanding from one person can be equivalent to sort of top level understanding of 20 people. So just pragmatism is called. That's
a really good point. Bringing in other sources of data. And often I find that our customers do know about the problems. The survey kind of just reinforces the knowledge that they have already within the organization, right? We have another question. Who are the stakeholders you would recommend you include in the XM maturity model if it's only CX people within the organization or other people? So you can go either way. Like it's a great tool to start just within the CX team to have that assessment. But the way we have actually seen this working with our customers is when they launch the survey. Effectively, it's a survey that goes on to a larger group of people in the organizations to think about champions in the business from, sales, account managers, digital teams, CRM, IT. So people who have a say in CX and they're not necessarily managing the CX program, but they will be impacted by a good program and have an interest. Gathering that feedback is going to give you a really good understanding actually almost of what are the perceptions of the business around customer experience, and then from there you can start building up and develop your customer experience program. I have another question. Email firewalls are getting more and more challenging. How do we avoid being another thing in the clutter? We don't have a technical person here. We might actually follow up.
But there are protocols, there are ways of distributing, getting yourself, there are spam lists and there are spam lists, and there are certainly things you can set up in organizations when you're distributing surveys on Qualtrics, which can minimize yourself being termed as junk. It's not a perfect science, but I know there are certainly steps and tools. And if any specific client has questions, I'm sure the technical team can share some ideas on that for sure.
I mean, even just the designing of the email invitation, sometimes the word content you put in has an impact on spammers. But we'll check in with our team and come back to you if we have additional information to share with you all. We have another question. How can we deal with survey fatigue? It's a good question. We don't want to over survey. I think sometimes you have an opinion. Maybe I'll go.
I think it's about design. It's about short, concise, and making the survey make sense to people. I think tolerance is there. I mean, I'm back to the point that I think survey fatigue comes from terrible surveys or, badly designed rather than necessarily the number you might do. I mean, clearly you will have a cadence and how often you should issue. Most companies will settle at, say, quarterly or 6 monthly. But if your surveys are well designed, have a purpose, and you're selling the benefit of the surveys, you'd be surprised what people will answer.
Yeah. And this also comes back to that closed loop, right? Telling your customers that you are acting, you're listening, and you're acting on the feedback. You'll then see long-term an impact on response rates and willingness to share more feedback. Any other questions? Doesn't look like. Well, we may wrap up. I think we're just on time. So thank you so much for joining us today.